Hey guys, so this video is going to be on poetry and I'm going to go through 4 poems today and I'll do the rest at a later date. So today I'm going to do Ozymandias and Last Dutchess, and then I'm going to do Checking Out the History and London. So I'm going to go through just a few key aspects of the poem. So I'm going to go through language, key themes, form and structure, and then an example of a poem that you can compare it with and how you could do that. But remember, you can compare these any way you want. You can compare any poem with any other poem for whatever theme's given. This is going to be an example of what you could do to give you some inspiration maybe in your exam. Sorry about the tan, by the way. I've not washed it off yet, it's very patchy. Ozymandias is a poem by Percy Shelley, and it's quite short, and it just describes a statue of this ruler called Ozymandias and how his statue has decayed, which ultimately represents his power decaying. So the first poem I'm going to go through is Ozymandias, and I would recommend you having your anthology with you so you can look through the poem and find the quotes that I'm going to be talking about, because I've not necessarily got it in order. I'm sorry about that. So you can just find the quote and then maybe write this annotation or just think about it. So the first quote I picked out is Antique Land, which shows how it was once useful but it's now not important, yet it still has some worth and it's still precious to some extent. And also the adjective antique shows that it has a story or maybe an important message from history, which Shelley the poet is showing through this. Second quote I picked out is A shattered visage lies, which shows how power is fragile, delicate and futile, and how it doesn't last forever, and also it's come from the fact that nature is more powerful than man, as nature has had the power to destroy this statue. Next quote is King of Kings, which is superlative, and it portrays his arrogance, how he thinks he's the best. The next quote I've got is Look on my works, which is quite ironic since nobody is looking at this statue anymore since it's a deserted land. And also it shows how his achievements are ultimately worthless. And now I've got Cold Command, Frown and Sheer. And then the alliteration of the C on Cold Command reflects Ozymandias' harsh nature. And also Frown and Snare are quite negative, and it portrays the poem as an attack on power, as Shelley is insulting Ozymandias and his statue, saying how he looks quite scary and intimidating and quite mean. And also Boundless and Bare is alliteration, and this emphasises emptiness. And also structurally, the poem focuses on Ozymandias and it comes out, it zooms out, focusing on the wider picture, so boundless and bare, like what's around, rather than Ozymandias, which further shows his insignificance, as Shelley is now describing what's around him because he's not that important anymore. And then the last quote I've got is Nothing besides remains, which is quite a quick contrast because he has power of nothing. Shelley's gone from describing this big statue to nothing remains anymore, which is very anticlimactic. Key themes in this poem are the power of humans, as Ozymandias is presented as a ruler who ultimately abused his power, as shown through the quote Snare of Cold Command. And also this poem focuses on the temporary nature of ruler's power, as we see it doesn't last forever. And also the theme of arrogance is shown, as Ozymandias thought everybody was inferior to him and he treated his subjects quite badly. And he was very proud of his work and what he did, which shows further arrogance, which again we see contrasted since his statue is now ultimately destroyed. And so if he was still around, you'd suspect his arrogance would have been deflated. And then also the power of nature is shown quite a lot, because after all of Ozymandias' achievements, he is now pretty much irrelevant, as shown through nature, since nature's had the power to destroy this statue that represents him and all that he was seen as and all that he was worth. And so this powerful statue has now been undermined and destroyed by nature, which significantly won in the end. This poem's form is a sonnet, which is a love poem, and so in this case it represents self-love and the love that Ozymandias has for himself. And also this is kind of complicated now, so I think this is for higher grades, but the type of sonnet also changes throughout the poem. It starts as a Petrarchian sonnet, but then it starts to use elements of Shakespearean sonnet, so just in like an A-B rhyme scheme. And this reflects how power is changeable, and it doesn't stay in one place as the sonnet form changes, such as Ozymandias' power changes. Last Dutchess is a poem written by Robert Browning, and he talks about a duke who is very powerful and very full of pride, and he talks about his duchess to an envoy and how she was too flirtatious and this annoyed him, so he decided to have her killed. Next is My Last Dutchess, which is my favourite poem, coincidentally, so I'm going to enjoy this. So the first quote I've picked out is looking as if she was alive, which instantly sets a sinister tone and almost foreshadows her death, being a duchess. Next quote is, there's my last duchess painted on the wall, which sounds like the duke owns her and she's now stationary, so the duke can control her more easily. Now she's dead and a painting on the wall, she's kept in a way that the duke wants her, a way where he has full control and she can't look at anybody anymore. And also, she might have been painted directly on the wall, as that was quite common back when this poem was written. And so, again, this emphasises how she's been kept in a way where the duke can have full control of her forever. The next quote I picked is, the curtain I have drawn for you, which similarly shows how the duke can now control who looks at the painting, which is ironic since he couldn't control who looked at her when she was alive, which is what irritated him. And then he says, not the first are you to ask, which again is significant because it's a question from the envoy, who's the messenger, but we hear it through the duke, which shows how he's in complete control and he is the only one talking. Next quote I picked out is Spot of Joy when referring to the Duchess, and the Duke repeats this twice and it shows just how much his wife blushing annoys him, which appears quite paranoid to the reader. And then he says, too easily impressed, her looks went wherever, So here the Duke is criticising her friendliness, which, I mean, he's being quite hyperbolic, he's being quite extreme, her looks went everywhere. I'm assuming that's not true. And so the Duke is trying to justify himself and justify why he had her killed, because she was looking at too many people. So then he says, she thanked men, good. And now there's punctuation here, there's a dash between men and good, so if you've got your anthology out, you'll be able to see that. And this gives an almost stuttering effect, which shows how he's so exasperated with her behaviour and so frustrated by how she's acting, even though she's acting normal to most readers. He then says, I choose never to stoop, which shows how he doesn't want to feel like less of a man. He feels like he will lose some of his authority and masculinity if he has to talk to her and just say, hey, you're being too flirty, I don't like it. And then he says, at starting is my object. This is towards the end of the poem now, which is a subtle warning for his next wife and also creates a cyclical structure. So basically like the poem will repeat itself on and on in the cycle, because the Duke's now just going to get a new wife and we can assume that this marriage may end the same. The key themes in My Last Dutchess is first the power of humans, as we can see the Duke being obsessed with power because he wants to control the Duchess and who sees her when she's alive and then who sees her when she's dead as a portrait. And we see him feel no remorse or accountability for his wife's murder, as he says, I gave commands, the Norse miles stopped. And then the caesura here also emphasises her sudden death. And the fact that he wasn't the one to have her killed and he's being quite ambiguous about it is very sinister. And also the form, which I'll get to, reflects his power as it's a dramatic monologue. And then also arrogance is a key theme throughout the poem, as his wife's flirtatious behaviour ultimately annoys his pride, which is the reason why he gets her killed. He didn't appreciate her flirting with everybody, even though she wasn't really. Because he says, my gift of a 900-years-old name, which shows how much pride he has over himself and his history, his status, etc. And felt the Duchess didn't appreciate this enough. And then also, he was too proud to stoop and criticise her behaviour, which again shows his excessive pride. The form of this poem is a dramatic monologue, which basically means it's just the Duke talking directly to his audience and he's the only one who's speaking. Even though the envoy's there, it's a one-sided conversation. And so the Duke is ultimately speaking to a silent listener, which again shows the power that he has over the envoy and in general. And then the structure is one stanza, which you can argue kind of contrasts the power that we see throughout his language in the poem, as this shows the Duke is kind of unable to control his thoughts and his feelings. And this is also emphasised by lots of enjambment, which shows how he's kind of getting carried away and can control what he's thinking and organise his thoughts properly. And so it kind of, you can argue that it shows the Duke has less power than he thinks and that he tries to show. And also rhyming couplets, you can say, shows the Duke's desire for control. So two poems that I think compare well, depending on the question that you get, are Ozymandias and Last Dutchess. As firstly, they both show the theme of power and power in humans. And then you can talk about that with language generally, but specifically you can also include form, which I think is quite a strong point. For example, Last Dutchess is a dramatic monologue, which means nobody gets to speak but the Duke. And Ozymandias is a sonnet, which represents self-love and the love Ozymandias has for himself. And also you can talk about how power is undermined throughout both poems. This is most significant in Ozymandias through the Petrarchian to the Shakespearean sonnet, and as well the general ideas in the play of this big statue being brought down, which is ironic.